He started crying over other people's words. Huh? The great free speech advocate turned out that, he crumples over mean words. If he starts to cry over mean words, then it's just a hop, skip, and a jump before he starts to say, you know something? We should be banning those mean words. Like most everyone, I was extremely impressed with Jordan Peterson when he first hit the scene. 2016, 17, something like that, when he was giving testimony about this law in Canada that would make it illegal to deliberately misgender some transsexual. And he gave very compelling testimony as to why he was opposed to such a measure. Basically, he didn't want the state to be compelling people to compelling people's speech, which is a perfectly reasonable worry, concern, and it's something that I certainly can get behind. And I started watching more of his videos. And as I watched more of his videos, I found myself agreeing with more and more of what he had to say. I bought his book, 12 Rules for Life. And it's a terrific book. But the thing is, see, as you start watching his content, you realize that he's not saying anything particularly controversial. Or let me rephrase this. See, everything that he is saying, that he has said in his YouTube videos, that he wrote about in his 12 Rules for Life or 12 Rules for Living or whatever it is. See, anything that he had said, 30 years ago, everybody would have just said, yeah, that's just conventional wisdom. Why are you bringing this up? In a very real sense, Jordan Peterson is a throwback to what everybody calls the classical liberal. Yeah. The thing is, he seems rather radical to a lot of people on the left because, of course, the left has gone insane. They've gone so far out on a limb that they're, floating on nothing but air, floating on their own farts, to tell you the truth. I mean, okay, we know where the left's at, but the point about Jordan Peterson, right? Nothing he is saying is particularly controversial or even particularly insightful. And I don't mean this in a disrespectful way towards the people who like his content or to the man himself. I'm going to disrespect him in a little bit, but not insofar as his content. What he's saying is just perfectly reasonable, perfectly milquetoast, perfectly jejune. I mean, it's no big deal what he has to say. In other words, the guy's a centrist. He is a middle-of-the-roader. And that's where I start to have problems with Jordan Peterson. Because like all super diehard centrists, like all middle-of-the-roaders, like all fence-sitters, when it comes to crunch time, he sort of gives in. And that's the thing that I don't like about him. He gives in, he cedes. He cedes ground, he doesn't stand for anything. That's the thing that always bothered me, and I remember the specific moment when I realized this. It was when he threw Faith Goldy under the bus. Yeah. Full disclosure, I know Faith Goldy personally. I like her. I'm sympathetic to her. We're not friends, we're friendly. And as far as I'm concerned, she's always been just a terrific person, and nothing that she has to say, although clearly very nationalistic, is particularly nothing that she has to say is something that you can condemn, because she's not advocating violence. She's not advocating anything that would be beyond the pale. She's just criticizing things, okay? And her criticisms, her critiques are on the money. Anyway, going back to Faith Goldy and Jordan Peterson. See, she was supposed to be on a panel with Jordan Peterson, Gad Saad, who's another, one of these members of the intellectual dark web, and a couple of others, I forget whom, but they were low level. It was basically Peterson, Gad Saad, and Faith Goldy. And Faith Goldy's invitation to this panel was rescinded. And Jordan Peterson went along with that, which I found really hypocritical. The panel was something about free speech or something like that, and they were going to talk about free speech, but Faith Goldy's invitation had been rescinded because she had gone and talked to, I think, the podcast of the Daily Stormer or something like that. And because of this, and because of pressure of people saying that, oh, she's beyond the pale, she's a neo-Nazi or something like that, they pulled the plug on her being on the panel. I thought that was weak on the part of Peterson. If he's going to stand up for free speech, he should stand up for free speech, especially of the people whose speech he most dislikes. Right? And that's the whole point of free speech, right? But he caved. And then came the Kavanaugh tweet. This was a famous tweet. See, back when the whole Kavanaugh hearings were going on, and everybody was sort of like picking sides between supporting Kavanaugh or supporting Blasey Ford, well, the middle of the roader, Jordan Peterson, put out this incredibly idiotic tweet. He said that Kavanaugh should accept the position of Associate Justice of the Supreme Court and then immediately resign, which was the most asinine, stupid thing you could say, trying to be friends with everybody. What is, I mean, it just, I saw that tweet and there was this feeling in my gut. And the feeling of my gut was just one word. And the word was loser. Yeah, because the guy wants to be friends with everybody. In Spanish, we have a saying, nunca quedas mal con nadie, which means literally, you never come across badly with anybody. And that's sort of like what Jordan Peterson wants to do. He wants to be the ultimate middle of the roader. He wants to be friends with everybody. And most especially, he wants to make money. Yeah, that's the thing about Jordan Peterson. He really wants to make his shekels, right? And I don't have a problem with anybody making money, right? But the thing is, see, I do have a problem when you come across to one audience one way, but then you're actually not that thing. Jordan Peterson came across as this die-hard free speecher, right? Good on him. I'm a die-hard free speecher. I have no problem with anybody saying anything that they want to. And except for a few clear exceptions, incitement to violence and a few other things, libel, slander, I am totally in favor of free speech. Nazis and commies want to say whatever they want to say, fine, I don't care, right? He was portraying himself as such a person. I was sympathetic to him. But then it came out that he wasn't that thing. And more to the point, he's trying to make money off of audience members, such as myself, who misguidedly thought that he is a free speech absolutist. He's not a free speech absolutist. He's a guy who wants to be a part of the establishment. I mean, look at his pedigree, for crying out loud, right? Yeah, he's a professor at University of Toronto, or was. I don't know his status at this point, to tell you the truth. But he used to teach at Harvard. He went up the whole academic hierarchy with establishment credentials. He is an establishment figure. And he wants to get this audience of people who are disenfranchised, people who are dissident, people like you and myself. He wants us as his audience, but yet at the same time he wants to be part of the establishment. He wants Kavanaugh to sit on the Supreme Court, and then he wants Kavanaugh to immediately resign. I don't have any patience for such people. Such people who want to be a part of the establishment and yet at the same time appeal to people who are outside of the establishment, who not only are outside of the establishment, but actively despise the establishment. Because I grew up in the establishment. I grew up in the establishment in Chile and in the United States. I've got the pedigree, the degrees, the schooling, everything, the social contacts, all that shit. And yet I despise the establishment of both countries, by the way, of both Chile, where my family's from, and the United States, where I lived most of my adult life. I look at those establishments today and I find them corrupt and despicable. I want nothing to do with them. And see, Jordan Peterson wants to be a part of the establishment. And that's why he goes on these interviews with the mainstream media. That's why he puts out his book with mainstream publishers. He wants that validation from the mainstream. And at the same time, he wants to appeal to an audience that the mainstream actively despises, that the mainstream, the establishment, wants to crush people like you and me. That's what the establishment wants to do. You can't serve two masters. You can't appeal to both Peter and Paul. You cannot be trying to appeal to dissident young men, or not so young men, some of us, and at the same time be a part of an establishment that wants to crush this dissidence. No, you have to pick sides. And Jordan Peterson, for a long time, was very successful in essentially fooling both sides, right? And he's still fooling both sides, because both sides, the establishment and the dissident, they don't quite see him, but I do. I know what he is. He is a middle-of-the-roader, a fence-sitter who's in it for the prestige and the money. He wants the establishment prestige and he wants the dissident money because we're a big audience. There's a lot of money to be made from people like us. And he figured it out. He's not stupid. He's a very smart man and he likes his shekels. And so he went out and he appealed to people on the dissident side of the equation and got our money. And he has tried to appeal to the people on the establishment side to get their approval. And it's worked for quite a while. Not with me, not anymore, not since that tweet about Kavanaugh, but it's worked for quite a number of people. But then here we come to the interesting little turn in the story of Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson, out of the blue, checked himself into rehab. It seems that he had gotten hooked on some anti-anxiety medications. Well, you know, it can happen to the best of us. And the rationale was that he was distraught over the cancer of his wife, which is perfectly understandable. He is the single marriage that he's had, and he's been married for several decades, and his wife apparently got cancer or was diagnosed with cancer, and this cancer could have turned deadly. Apparently she survived, and good on her. But of course, you know, during the period that she was sick and she was in treatment, he got on anti-anxiety meds and he got hooked on them and wound up going to rehab. That part, no problem. I have no problem with that whatsoever. I can understand that. It's perfectly human and perfectly fine and legitimate. No problem whatsoever. It's what happened immediately after. After he came out of rehab, Jordan Peterson gave an interview. And the guy was practically crying like a little girl. He was clearly unable to control his emotions. And he gave this interview, and it was an embarrassment. I mean, he's like literally on the verge of tears through the entire, what was it, like 45-minute interview, 50-minute interview, or something like that? You know, you can find it online. It's just too depressing. I didn't even watch the whole goddamn thing. I just sort of like skipped through it, and he's like crying practically the whole time. And the thing that you know made him cry the most was the fact that people were mean to him online. Oh my God! You know, I mean, it just, as a man, I felt repelled by that. I felt completely repelled by that. I wanted nothing to do with such an individual who would cry in public like this. Where's your dignity for crying out loud? Look, don't get me wrong. Have I cried? Fuck yeah, I've cried a number of times over a lot of things that have happened in my life. You know, some of them terrible, some of them trivial. You know, I've cried like a little bitch lots of times. That's not the point. The point is, see, you scour the internet, you scour every YouTube video that there is to be found, and you're never going to find me crying on camera. Never. Okay? You will never see me crying on camera because I have a little bit of dignity, for crying out loud. Dignity before all. Yeah? Dignity before humiliating myself by doing an interview where I'm on the verge of tears, practically hysterical. I was like, no, this is not a man who is an example for anything. You cannot take seriously a man who, number one, cannot control his emotions, or number two, has emotions so overwhelming, but does not have the sense to realize that he should not be giving an interview if he is in that emotional state. Yeah, because like, see, in my own case, there have been times that I have been incredibly distraught. During the times that I've made these videos, the videos that you're watching right now. Yeah, lots of times I've gone through different things that I'm certainly not going to share with you because they're my own private business, but I've been incredibly distraught. Do you think I've made a video when I've been in such an emotional state? Hell no. Do you think I've gone on a live stream when I've been in such an emotional state? Of course not. Because I know myself. I'm a man. I know myself, and I realize that sometimes, because of reasons, because of things going on in my life, very serious things, some of them life and death, not of my own, but of other people whom I love and care for very much, that I am in no shape to go on a live stream and talk to people, to do a video, to potentially expose myself and suffer an emotional collapse on camera, on a live stream. I'm not going to do it. No, of course not. Because I want to maintain my dignity, my sense of self-respect. Yeah, and I know that a lot of people watching this video are going to say, oh, you're lacking in compassion, you know, poor Jordan Peterson, you know, his wife got sick and he had to go through rehab and withdrawal is awful and blah, blah, blah. Yes, I agree. All those things are awful. But you can't go out there and show yourself to be a weakling. No. I don't buy that. No, it's just, I don't truck with that kind of emotionality, that kind of weakness, parading weakness. I just don't truck with it, and I won't. And I won't say that it's all right. And no, it's not all right. And you shouldn't think that it's all right either. See? You should not. Jordan Peterson is a horrible example of how to behave in public when the chips are down and the shit gets heavy. He is a horrible example, and do not emulate him ever. I insist, we all go through rough times, all of us. I don't care what your name is. And we all sometimes wind up crying into a pillow in just emotional agony. It's perfectly normal. It happens to every man. Any man who says that that's not the case, he's lying. It's simple as that. Because if, you know, pain is part of being a man. Pain and disappointment and misery, agony, that's the part of being a man. And in point of fact, you should always embrace those times of agony and disappointment and failure, because it's only by embracing such agony that you can truly taste when things are going good, when you can see the light in your life and appreciate the splendor of it when things are going well. See? It's only by embracing the misery that you can appreciate the joy of your life. But wallowing in your misery in public, crying like a little bitch, no, it's just not acceptable. It's not acceptable, and if you ever find yourself in the position that you might do that, stand up and walk out of the room and go to a closet, go to a bathroom, go to your own room, wherever. Turn out the lights and cry on your own, and that is the way to handle it. You don't cry in public. That's weak. Only weaklings do it. You know, the guy, Jordan Peterson, he said a lot of wise things, a lot of smart things, a lot of sensible things in his videos and his book and whatnot. Yeah. And he set himself up as a leader. That's what he was doing, right? He was setting himself up as a leader, as a prophet of the dissident movement, because we are growing. We are growing and we are percolating. We are starting to coalesce. We are starting to become something more powerful and something that the establishment is afraid of, right? And Jordan Peterson was setting himself up as sort of like the daddy figure for this movement, because he wasn't really a leader. He was more like the big brain. Yeah, the big brain who could explain it all. Yeah, the big brain who could explain it all. He was a prophet, right? But I think that he was a false prophet. I think it was a false prophet because ultimately, as those little things that he did here and there proved, see, he was a centrist. He was a centrist who did not represent the people on the dissident side of the equation. He wanted to be friends with both sides. He wanted the acceptance of both sides. And he wanted the coin that both sides have to offer. The dissident side is money, and the establishment side is acceptability. He wanted both of those coins. And I can't take him seriously. No, I can't. I mean, I'm sorry. You know, you can call me whatever you want to call me. You can call me like, you know, I don't know what you'd call me if I simply do not accept a man who crumbles into wet Kleenex in an interview. He crumbles like wet Kleenex over mean tweets. See, if a man in public starts weeping over something horrible, for instance, if a soldier, for instance, you know, on television while giving a speech or something, starts weeping over the loss of his brothers in arms, I'm going to respect that man, of course, because he is simply, he cannot control the sadness of having lost a brother in arms. And that's a terrible tragedy, the thought of a young man dying, a young man who is your friend. And I can empathize with that. And point of fact, I have close friends who have died, and I miss them terribly. And if I were to see a soldier on a podium somewhere or in some interview, and he starts talking about a fallen comrade and starts to cry, I would never hold it against him. I would never say, oh, look at him, he's a chicken shit, he can't, hold up. No, I would never say that, no. Because I recognize that there are moments and situations and tragedies in our lives where the emotions are too strong and they overwhelm us and they come out. And I understand that. But when those emotions are too strong, they have to be justified with something real. The death of a comrade, the death of a child, the loss of something great and wonderful and good. Those are reasons to weep. But to be crying over mean tweets, over mean words, no. And that's what's wrong with Jordan Peterson, yeah? He started crying over other people's words. Huh? The great free speech advocate turned out that, he crumples over mean words. If he starts to cry over mean words, then it's just a hop, skip, and a jump before he starts to say, you know something? We should be banning those mean words. Yeah, that's what it means. And that's why I don't buy Jordan Peterson anymore.